Okay, we are back for part 2 of our chapter 12 lecture on robbery. And we had finished up talking about robbery versus burglary versus larceny or theft. So we kind of compared those. So now let's dissect these elements because we know the basic elements, but I think it's important that before we talk about how do we respond to a robbery call and deal with some of that, let's talk a little bit more definitively about the elements. So in most state statutes, there are common elements and they are defined precisely. Now, some states have only one degree of robbery and others have robbery in the first, second, and even third. And still others have designated simple and aggravated robbery, with aggravated robbery involving the presence of a deadly weapon and or the actual injury of someone. But again, despite having different categories or degrees of robbery, most state statutes contain some very common elements. And I want to go through them so you really understand what they mean, because we can say it, but we may not understand what it is. So let's look at them. So the first one, wrongful taking of personal property. So what does that even mean? So, various statutes use phrases like unlawful taking, felonious taking, and knowing he or she is not entitled to. Intent is an element of the crime in some but not all states. So to take wrongfully, the robber must have no legal right to the property. Moreover, property must be personal property, as distinguished from like real property, like, your house or something like that. So we're talking more of personal property. But, so I hope that kind of explains what, the wrongful taking, the felonious taking. Now we kind of have a better idea. From the person or in the presence of the person, or the person's presence. In most cases, in the presence of a person means that the victim sees the robber take the property. Now, this is not always the case because the victim may be locked in a separate room. For example, robbers often take victims into a separate room, like a restroom or a bank vault, while they search for the desired items or the cash they're looking for. So such actions do not remove the crime from the presence of the person as long as the separation from the property is the direct result of force or threats of force. Does that make sense? And again, the presence of a person also means that if you were, if they ask you to put your stuff on the counter or throw your wallet on the ground, that also encompasses in the presence. Okay, and then finally, against the person's will by force or threat of force. And this essential element clearly separates robbery from burglary or theft or larceny. As noted, most robberies are committed with a weapon or other dangerous device, or by indicating that one is present, meaning like they have one. The force or threat is generally sufficient to deter resistance. It can be immediate or threatened in the future. It can be directed at the victim's family, or a person who is with the victim. So I'm hoping that kind of clears up those little pieces. So now with that said, let's talk a little bit about how do you respond to a robbery call. So a robbery in progress call involves an all units response. Now, again, it's based on department policy as well, with units close to the scene going there directly, while other units cover the area near the scene looking for the possible getaway car. Because remember, by the time law enforcement gets the call, a lot of times the actual robbery has taken place and the suspect has fled or is fleeing. So if all the units went directly to the scene, you might miss the suspect vehicle or the person running. So the closest units go to the scene because they want to get that information that they might be able to put out to further the description. And the other units are going to want to check or look for the possible getaway vehicle, etc. Now, other cars might go to certain checkpoints in your city, places like bridges or converging highways, major intersections, freeway entry ramps and exit ramps, because the robbery suspect may flee the city and you may want to sit by the freeway ramp that's closest to the robbery and waiting to see if that car comes by. So does that kind of make sense to everybody? And officers should observe all vehicles as they approach a robbery scene and look for like little things. You know, do they see a vehicle speeding? And so it's really, really important. So here are a couple of things to do when responding to a robbery in progress call. And again, your policy might change some of these. First, proceed rapidly to the location, but use caution. Some policies will let you drive or let you respond with lights and siren, and some will not. But either way, you need to get there as quickly as possible, but use caution, because crashing isn't going to help anyone, because if you can't get there, you can't help anyone. And then one other thing to remember is that lights and siren are very loud, the siren. So if they're still inside the location, they're going to hear you coming. So these are all considerations. Next, assume that the robbers are still at the scene, unless otherwise advised, but then you still never want to assume. You're going to want to clear that location when you get there. Number 3, be prepared for gunfire. Because of the possibility that these individuals are armed, you have to be prepared that they may want to get away. Their job is to get away, and you may have to use lethal force. Next, look for any type of getaway vehicle. So you might see a vehicle again fleeing the scene, or if you pull up and maybe you're being told over the radio the suspects are still in the business, but it looks like they're getting ready to leave. Look outside, because chances are there is a getaway vehicle parked out there with somebody sitting in it. Next, look for accomplices fleeing the area or attempting to hide. A lot of times these robberies are not just one man or one woman shows. Of course, you want to avoid a hostage situation if possible. And then last, of course, you want to make an immediate arrest if the suspect is at the scene, if you can. So, again, and in addition, I'll just kind of add something else. Officers should always guard against the dangers inherent in stereotyping when responding to robberies in progress. So just, keep an eye on that in your mind, in the back of your mind. And upon arrival, like I said, attempt to locate any vehicle that the suspects might use, even if you don't have a description of it. Remember, it's probably going to be within a block of the crime scene, and the engine will probably be running. It generally is going to have a person in it, the lookout or the driver, the wheelman, if you will, waiting for the suspects inside the location to return. And if the vehicle is in fact identified through prior information and it's empty, you're going to want to immobilize it by doing something to it to where it won't run. So whether you got to lift the hood if you can and pull something out of there, pull the distributor cap, or flatten the tires, or whatever it is that you've got to do, those will be game time decisions when you get there. So just think about those things. Part of dealing with robberies is, again, to understand that there may be the possibility of a hostage situation. So while typically law enforcement takes a minute or two to get there, and it's going to take a minute or two for the individuals to complete the crime, kind of get their wits about them and then make a call to us, usually the suspects have already fled. But there are instances in which officers might get on scene with these suspects still inside of the location. If this occurs, note that crisis negotiation is a very complex discipline. Negotiating with an armed, barricaded person holding hostages can be a very prolonged and stressful event. And as a prior SWAT commander, I know that there have been SWAT calls that have lasted 30 minutes, and there have been SWAT calls that have lasted 2 days. So you have to understand that. And the priorities should be, number one, preserving life, number two, apprehending the suspect, and number three, recovering the property. And the property, of course, is last. Now, accomplishing these priorities requires specialized training in hostage situations. So while the patrol officers may set up the perimeter and surround a location, at one point they're probably going to call in their experts in dealing with this, and this would be what we call special weapons and tactics teams or crisis negotiation teams, or both actually. Now, the average length typically for a hostage type situation is about 12 hours. And again, the main priority here is to preserve life. So once the location is surrounded, you don't have to rush anymore, and you can kind of proceed with, as your policy dictates. And, you have time for the most part on your hand. Okay, so just kind of understand a little bit of that. So again, usually you don't need to rush into the scene immediately and proceed with direct contact after the place is surrounded. In a few cases, it may be better to do nothing, but to let the hostage taker kind of have a chance to think about it and maybe to resolve the situation. And to its advantage, the passage of time can do a lot of different things. And let me see if I have that information. Okay, I don't. So I'll read it to you. So the passage of time can provide the opportunity for face-to-face contact, maybe with a hostage taker. It'll allow time for the negotiator to attempt to establish a rapport. It will permit mental, emotional, and physical fatigue to kind of operate against the hostage taker because they're all stressed out. Increase the hostage taker's need for food or water, sleep, etc., the longer that it goes. Increase the possibility of the hostage takers reducing demands to reasonable compliance levels. So the longer it goes, the little things might be okay. Allowing the hostage escape, the hostage the possibility to escape. Time provides for more rational thinking in contrast to the emotional things that go on, at the initial stage of the crime. And it may also lessen the hostage taker's anxiety and reduce their own adrenaline flow, allowing kind of some more rational negotiation. So again, these are the teams that I'm talking about. This is the Inland Empire Special Weapons and Tactics Team. This is a multi-agency SWAT team, meaning there are 3 agencies. It's the Fontana Police Department, the Rialto Police Department, and the Colton Police Department. And you can see they have a lot of equipment and a lot of members, and doing these teams in this particular manner, this multi-agency really is proficient. And again, remember I talked about elapsed time. So as you can see in the little chart here, at the top, at the beginning in the first hour or so, there's going to be this rage and excitement, and then it's going to start to dwindle a little bit, and you're going to get frustration and stress. And then it's going to start to dwindle, and then you're going to get a little bit of rational thinking and fatigue and exhaustion. And this is a good thing. Letting time just take its course. Now, it doesn't mean that that could change, but typically these are, good thinking points just for you to remember. Now, there is where after passage of time, we have to note this, that the hostages might begin to identify with their captors, and sympathize with them as well. And this particular instance is called the Stockholm Syndrome. And again, this occurs when hostages start to report that they have no ill feelings toward the hostage takers, and further, that they kind of fear the police more than they fear the individuals that had taken them hostage in the first place. So these are other things that we have to kind of consider as we're going through this. All right, so what are some challenges then? And we're getting close to being done. So some challenges for investigators as it relates to the preliminary investigation. Well, the first one would be lag time in reporting a robbery. Because the robber, again, as I said, is usually gone when the police department arrives. And that's because of the speed of the occurrence of a robbery. So things happen so fast, a lot of times, again, by the time we get the phone call, the suspects are out of the area. Some other challenges would be an immediate canvass of the scene to locate property or any type of evidence behind. And then finally, to be patient. Remember these, the traumatizing effect on victims and witnesses. And because of that, we have to really understand that we're going to have to be patient with them because they have gone through this ordeal. So these are all things that are kind of special challenges for us as it relates to robberies. Now, again, I want to talk a little bit more about the canvass. So, as I said, conduct an immediate canvass of the neighborhood because the suspect may also be hiding, let's say, in a parked car, in a gas station restroom, on the roof of a building. Check motels and hotels in the area. If another city is nearby, check the motels there. Look for discarded property such as the weapon, a wallet, money bag, or other items that were taken from the victims. Stolen purses and wallets, a lot of times they're discarded within minutes. The robber's going to reach in, grab what they can, and then throw the shell of the purse or the wallet on the ground. Now, stolen jewelry or cash usually won't be recovered unless an arrest is made immediately after the crime. Now, in cases where jewelry or other high valuable items are taken, officers should start to check with local pawn shops or resale stores and any online sites like Craigslist or eBay, because they might try to sell the property. And again, robbery usually leaves victims and witnesses feeling vulnerable and fearful, making it difficult for them to give accurate descriptions and details of what occurred. So really, again, just, be patient, okay? So part of the complete investigation is going to be identifying the suspect. So we've talked a lot about a lot of different things. Now, I want to talk about some of the various techniques or things that you need to think about as it relates to identifying a suspect. So the various techniques used in suspect identification that we talked about back in Chapter 7 are relevant at this point. At minimum, obtain information about the suspect's general appearance, clothing, disguises, the weapon, and the vehicle. And let's add on to those a little bit more. So disguises, to conceal their identities. Many robbers use ski masks or nylon stockings pulled over their heads, or even paper bags with eye holes. Other disguises include things like wigs or dyed hair, sideburns, scarves, different types of fake noses or even ears, sometimes makeup. And sometimes gauze is used to distort the shape of their cheeks or mouth. And tape is used to simulate cuts or to cover scars. So, and then consider too that clothing can serve as a disguise. Sometimes fake heels or soles can make you look taller. Collars can be pulled up and hats can be kind of pulled down. So a lot of times different uniforms, you know, the suspect may wear a uniform, such as like a delivery uniform or something else. And clothing and disguises may be discarded by the robber upon leaving the scene. And if that happens, they are extremely valuable evidence if recovered because they might have DNA. I remember one case where the person was wearing like a Halloween costume, but it had his name written in it, which is like, I don't know, that's not very smart, but we'll take it. A win's a win, right? And then weapons. Remember, think pistols, revolvers, semi-automatic weapons are frequently used in robberies, sometimes sawed-off shotguns, rifles, air guns, imitation guns, knives, razors, and other cutting and stabbing instruments, explosives, tear gas, and also different kinds of acids have been used, or at least they've been implied. There have been a couple of cases I worked where there were tasers that were used. Now, such weapons and devices are often found on or near the suspect when arrested, but many are hidden in the vehicle that are used or they're thrown out during the escape. So robbery victims are the most likely of all victims of violent crime to face an armed offender. So again, be patient. And then vehicles. Most vehicles used in robberies are inconspicuous. Popular makes like Hondas or something that attract no attention and are stolen just before the robbery. And some robbers leave the scene on foot and then maybe jump on a bus, or they get a taxi, or they might even commandeer a vehicle. Sometimes at gunpoint, they might commit one crime and then commit a carjacking. So these are all things that you have to kind of think about. So as we look at these different costumes that some of these robbers have, you know, we'll just kind of think about them as we go through. I don't think it's going to let me look at them. I'm not sure what happened, but I kind of wanted you to see those. So if I can, let's see if it's going to let me do it this time. It's not going to. Okay, well, just consider the different costumes that you know occur in robberies and things like that. So finally, just a couple things left. Establishing the modus operandi, or that MO. And even if the suspect is apprehended at the scene, the MO can help link the suspect with other robberies. So modus operandi is basically the Latin phrase to which, when you translate it over, means operation or operational method. It is a distinct pattern or manner of working that comes to be associated with a particular criminal. It's not the why. Okay, we know what, well, I mean, the why can be anything. It could be the person's a drug addict. It could be because they don't have a job. So the why is one thing. But the pattern, the MO, is necessary to link this individual possible with other crimes. So consider the MO. And in establishing the MO, you're going to want to look at some things like the type of the robbery and the time, maybe the method of attack and the weapon, the number of suspects involved, the voice and words, meaning like what did they say? And if they say something very, you know, specific, maybe you can link that to other robberies where the suspect has said exactly the same thing. The type of vehicle used, or any other type of peculiarity. I mean, something that's kind of peculiar or different. Or the actual object sought, meaning the property. Are they only stealing gold chains at gunpoint, or is there more? So again, these are things that will help you with the MO. And then physical evidence. Physical evidence at a robbery scene is usually minimal. Sometimes, however, the robbery occurs where a surveillance camera might be operating, like in a bank or a store, and that particular surveillance, whether it's digital or film, it can be processed immediately and then used as evidence. So physical evidence that can connect a suspect with a robbery includes things like, again, surveillance cameras, but more DNA, shoe prints, tire prints, tools, restraining devices, discarded clothing, those disguises, fibers and hairs, the note, and the stolen property itself. Maybe as the police are getting closer or something, they start throwing the money out the window. And don't overlook other things like cigarette butts or soda cans or bottles or gum, chewing gum, where you can actually get DNA. So these are important things for us to recall or to remember to complete our investigation. And then finally, talking about mapping robbery. So because robbery is inherently serial, meaning it happens over and over, mapping it has been proven very successful. Now, the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department used mapping to address an increase in robbery victimization among Charlotte's growing Hispanic population. And in this case, officers used GIS, or Global Information Software, mapping capabilities in the department's crime analysis unit to map all robbery incidents with Hispanic victims citywide. And then overlaying the maps revealed a close correlation between Hispanic robbery incidents and areas of high concentrations of Hispanic residents. And mapping narrowed the problem to robberies of Hispanic victims in the apartment complexes where they lived. It then identified a particular complex, the Park Apartments, that was a hot spot for these robberies, and then subsequently they were able to locate the suspect. So this global information software is really, really important. And right here, I just pulled this up the other day and threw it in there. So this is part of the city of Redlands. And a lot of times they have mapping systems where you can actually look up crime on your own to see what the crime is like in your city and where it's happening. So I looked up Redlands, and you can see within a period of, I think it was 2 weeks, or maybe it was 4 weeks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I think it was 4 weeks. So they had these 5 robberies. And if you click on here, and this is as a citizen, so you can look and see. But if there were clusters of these, this software would be able to tell you where certain things are happening. And it doesn't have to be just with robberies. It can be any type of crime. It can be auto thefts. It can be burglaries. These software things are great, but mapping robbery specifically really helps you start to look at where they're taking place. And then you can even map it by day of the week and time of the day and start to paint a picture like they did in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department when they were addressing all of the robberies happening in that particular area. All right. And then last, and I promise, is false reports. Because this does happen. And some indicators. Now, just because I tell you it's an indicator doesn't mean it's a false report. But it's something that you should think of. So some indicators of false robbery reports would be maybe an unusual delay in reporting. Maybe the amount of loss doesn't fit the victim's financial status. And I don't mean that disrespectful. I mean that if they're the average person and they tell me that they were robbed for $1 million cash, that doesn't quite, they don't match up. Does that make sense? Lack of correspondence with the physical evidence, meaning that things aren't lining up. Improbable events, exceptionally detailed accounts of what happened, or extremely vague description of what happened or the offender. And then finally, a lack of cooperation, meaning they just don't really want to tell you anything. They don't want to cooperate. Okay, so that wraps it up. So in summary, robbery is the felonious taking of another's property. Robberies are classified as either residential, commercial, street, or vehicle driver. Bank robberies are within the jurisdiction of the FBI, but also state and local agencies. Remember, we all work together. You need to prove each element of robbery separately. That's why I took all of that time going through all of those elements. And then again, it's important to obtain information about the suspect's general appearance, clothing, disguises, and vehicles, etc., so that way you can radio that information out as quickly as possible if you are the first officer on scene to one of these different types of robbery cases. Okay, so that's going to complete our Part 2 lecture on Chapter 12, covering robbery, and until next time.